Sigmund Freud was not just the founder of psychoanalysis, but a thinker who directed his gaze toward the darkest corners of the human mind. Born in 1856 in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he grew up in an environment of rigid religious traditions, but his restless mind soon led him to question them. Although raised in a Jewish family, he never practiced the faith and eventually became a fierce critic of religion. His background in neurology and his obsession with the unconscious led him to see faith as more than just a belief system. He interpreted it as a psychological manifestation, an illusion created by the human mind to cope with its own fears and repressed desires. Remember to subscribe if you like philosophy. Freud did not view religion as a mere institution, but as a symptom of the collective psyche. In works such as The Future of an Illusion and Moses and Monotheism, he developed the idea that faith in the divine is a defense mechanism, a way to avoid facing the uncertainty and anxiety of existence. For him, gods were nothing more than projections of our own emotional needs, idealized father figures to whom we turn for protection and comfort. Religion, in his analysis, was not a revealed truth, but a creation of the human unconscious to soothe the anxiety of an unpredictable world. His critique of religion was not simply a rejection based on reason, but an attempt to understand why humanity clings so strongly to faith. He was not concerned with whether God existed or not, but with what function belief in God served within the human mind. And his answer was not optimistic. For Freud, religion was not just an illusion, but a psychological trap that infantilized humanity, preventing its emotional maturity. If we want to understand his attack on religion, we must delve into his most provocative ideas, those that dismantle the framework upon which faith has been sustained for centuries. For Freud, religion is an illusion, not in the vulgar sense of a simple deception, but in the psychoanalytic sense of an unconscious desire projected onto reality. In The Future of an Illusion, he explains that religious beliefs do not arise from reason or evidence, but from the psychological need to feel protected. Humanity, Freud argues, faces a chaotic world, full of dangers and without guarantees. Nature is relentless. Death is inevitable, and existence offers no definitive answers. In this scenario, the mind seeks an authority figure to provide security, and that figure is God. The mechanism is similar to childhood. A child, defenseless against the world, depends on their parents to survive. They impose rules, but also offer love and protection. Religion, according to Freud, is an extension of this dynamic. God is the idealized father figure who watches over, punishes, and consoles. Faith in the divine is nothing more than a projection of the primitive relationship with parents, transferred to a cosmic scale. But there is a problem with this. By depending on a higher authority to give meaning to life, the individual never fully matures. They remain trapped in an infantile state, unable to embrace uncertainty or take full responsibility for their existence. This analysis makes religion a deeply human phenomenon, but also an obstacle to psychological development. Instead of accepting reality in its rawness, people prefer to cling to the promise that there is a higher plan, that death is not the end, and that someone, somewhere, is watching over them. The mind prefers the comfort of illusion over the anguish of truth. For Freud, this self-deception is not harmless. It is a way of keeping humanity in a state of perpetual dependence, incapable of fully assuming its autonomy. For Freud, religion is not just a psychological illusion, but also a collective neurosis. In his work, Civilization and Its Discontents, he compares religious beliefs to the symptoms of an obsessive disorder. Just as a neurotic individual develops rituals to ease anxiety, compulsively washing their hands, counting certain numbers, repeating phrases, humanity has created religious rituals to cope with its deepest fears. Prayer, sacrifices, strict moral norms, and sacred ceremonies would be nothing more than expressions of this collective compulsion. The similarity between religion and neurosis is not merely a superficial analogy, but an observation based on the dynamics of the unconscious. For Freud, religious dogmas function as mechanisms of control over the most primitive impulses of the human psyche. Guilt, sin, and divine punishment serve as forms of repression that keep unacceptable desires in check. Faith imposes norms that restrict sexuality, aggression, and individual autonomy, not because these are inherently bad, but because society's structure depends on their regulation. The problem with this mechanism, according to Freud, is that it creates chronic distress in the individual. The repression of impulses does not eliminate them. It merely hides them beneath layers of rationalization and fear. The believer does not stop feeling desire, anger, or ambition, but must disguise these impulses under the language of morality and guilt. And since religion establishes absolute and unbreakable norms, the individual finds themselves trapped in a contradiction. They desire what they must not desire. They fight against themselves, and in many cases, they end up burdened with guilt that paralyzes them. Freud saw this not as a path to spiritual elevation, but as a cultural pathology that has kept humanity in a state of perpetual inner conflict. For Freud, religion does not only repress individual impulses, but also serves as a mechanism of social control. In The Future of an Illusion, he explains how faith has been used throughout history to shape human behavior and maintain order in societies. Religious dogmas are not merely personal beliefs. They function as power structures that dictate what is permitted and what is forbidden, justifying obedience through fear and hope. The promise of heaven and the threat of hell are the most effective psychological instruments ever created. Unlike human laws, which can be questioned and changed, religious norms are presented as absolute and immutable. They cannot be negotiated or challenged without falling into heresy or sin. Freud saw this as a subtle yet profound form of domination. If people believe there is an omniscient force watching their every action, there is no need for police or prisons to control them. Religion makes self-censorship more effective than external repression because it places a judge inside the mind of each believer. This type of control not only limits behavior, but also shapes people's identities. Religion dictates not only what to do, but also what to think, what to feel, and what to fear. It defines what is good and what is evil, what is sacred and what is profane. For Freud, this comes at a huge psychological cost because it reduces the individual's ability to develop independent critical thinking. If everything is already decided by a higher authority, the search for truth becomes an act of rebellion. And in a society based on faith, questioning religion is not just doubting a dogma, but challenging the very order on which culture is built. For Freud, religion does not only repress and control, but also infantilizes the individual. In The Future of an Illusion, he argues that faith prevents psychological maturity because it keeps people in constant dependence on an invisible father figure. Just as a child looks to their parents for protection, guidance, and answers in a chaotic world, the believer seeks in God a refuge from the uncertainty of existence. But this dependence is not without consequences. It traps humanity in an immature mindset, incapable of accepting reality as it is. Religion tells us that there is a plan, that everything has a purpose, that suffering has meaning, and that someone, somewhere, is watching over us. But for Freud, this is precisely the trap. In his view, life is random and cruel, with no guarantees of justice or transcendent purpose. Accepting this is painful, but it is also the first step toward true maturity. Believing in a higher power that protects us may ease existential anxiety, but at the cost of robbing us of the ability to take full responsibility for our lives. This argument is unsettling because it suggests that human beings prefer illusion over truth. Freud did not see faith as a rational choice, but as a defense mechanism against anguish. It is not easy to stare into the abyss without the promise of cosmic meaning, without the certainty that everything will ultimately make sense. But for him, psychological growth does not consist of seeking comfort, but in facing reality without disguises. Maturity, in his view, is not believing in something reassuring, but daring to live without externally imposed certainties. For Freud, Religion does not only infantilize, but also hinders the individual's true freedom. In The Future of an Illusion, he makes it clear that faith is not merely a source of comfort, but also a form of submission. It makes us believe that our actions are determined by a higher order, that our morality depends on imposed rules, and that our salvation lies in obedience rather than questioning. But freedom, according to Freud, does not consist of blindly following a doctrine, but in understanding the forces that condition us and confronting them with awareness. Religion presents itself as a guide to virtue, but in reality, it acts as a barrier that limits autonomous thinking. Instead of allowing each person to build their own system of values based on experience and reflection, it imposes an absolute morality, leaving little room for the development of an individual ethical framework. For Freud, true maturity does not lie in following established rules out of fear of punishment or the desire for reward, but in deciding, with full awareness, how we want to live and what kind of people we want to be. But this freedom is not easy. Rejecting religion means accepting complete responsibility for our choices, without the comfort of a predefined moral framework. Without a God to punish or reward, we become the sole architects of our destiny. And this is terrifying. It is easier to obey than to think, more comfortable to believe in a divine purpose than to accept uncertainty. Freud tells us that religion keeps us within a secure structure, but at the cost of our ability to decide for ourselves. The question is whether we are willing to renounce the illusion and bear the weight of true freedom. For Freud, religion is not just an illusion, a neurosis, or a mechanism of control, but a reflection of humanity's fear of uncertainty. The promise of a God who gives meaning to suffering, of an absolute morality that guides us, and of a life after death that consoles us, is too appealing to be easily abandoned. No matter how many times reason questions it, faith finds a way to reinvent itself because it responds to a deep need, the need to impose order on a chaotic and terrifying universe. But Freud did not see this as a solution. He saw it as an obstacle. He believed that clinging to these illusions prevents us from growing, keeps us in a state of dependency, and stops us from facing life with full awareness. His proposal was not to replace religion with another belief system, but to embrace an approach based on knowledge, on the exploration of our own minds, and on the acceptance of reality without disguises. It is not about destroying faith, but about asking ourselves why we need it, what voids it fills, and whether we are willing to live without it. This is where his critique becomes most provocative. What remains if we leave religion behind? For Freud, what remains is the responsibility for our own existence. There are no gods to protect us, no predestined fates. There is only us, our decisions, our contradictions, and our ability to give life meaning without relying on imposed structures. It is not a comforting answer, but perhaps it is the only one that allows us to be truly free. And maybe, after all, true maturity consists in daring to live without absolute certainties.